Okay, great. Let's get started for the day. So I hope we've all managed to use the weekend well to get start getting a hold of the practice. Normally, it takes a couple of days for two reasons. One, waiting for the active noise from your daily life to start dying down, for your mind to start getting deeper, calmer. Second thing, it takes a little while to get a hang of the practice of the technique itself. Like we've discussed, this is a very specific way of applying the technique and needs to be applied in the right way to get the best benefits, make the most progress in it. I've been talking to all of you and very happy that most people are making a lot of progress and starting to go deeper in their minds. Today, I will cover a little bit about the third of the mental skills, right? So the last 2 days we've been talking about mindfulness, we've been talking about harmonious practice, which is the 6 R's, right? So simply being able to identify when your mind goes into a distraction or something that is more than a distraction, something that is a very strong habitual pattern, something that sucks our time, our emotional energy that we called a rabbit hole, right? So mindfulness helps us understand when our attention is going there, and the 6 R's or the harmonious practice allows us to bring our mind out of it without any violence, without any struggle, right? Without bringing the craving back to our object of meditation or the task that we are doing, the craving that is underlying the distraction, that which attached our attention to the distraction. So we talked about these two skills, the third skill, and why these three skills. These are interestingly, these are the skills that the Buddha has also laid out in the Eightfold Path, right? So we will talk about the Eightfold Path. We'll talk about what the Buddha was trying to essentially teach. What was the crux of his teaching? We'll get there, but all this groundwork helps us to understand that a lot better, right? So we are planting those respective seeds, so we are able to understand that better. So today we'll talk about the third of the skills, which is collectedness. When your mind is able to effortlessly stay with an intended object without having a desperation to go seeking for information or getting distracted by any other thing that comes up in the field of awareness. Okay, so we'll talk about that. I will just use a few visual aids. The other thing I want to talk about, there is a collectedness is related to something called the jhanas or dhyan samapatis. Right? These are states of consciousness, very special states of consciousness that do not arise without cultivation of mind. Okay, so we'll talk about the jhanas, and the third thing we'll talk about is the Brahmaviharas or the sublime states of mind. So, what are these Brahmaviharas? Starting with metta that we're currently using as our object of meditation, how they tie in with the practice. How does our mind go through different Brahmaviharas as the practice deepens? How do we get to know them better? How do we get to use them in our lives? So that's what we'll cover today. So I'll use a few visual aids for that, and then we'll have a discussion around it. Okay, so we'll continue with the extremely basic slide making and animation that I've been indulging in so far. As long as it helps you understand, I think the purpose is met. I have a friend who made a very poignant joke once. He said, the purpose of language is to communicate. So it was pretty much on the money when it came to the message he was trying to share. Great. Okay. So we've been using the gray bubbles to talk about our mind being with what we are intending to do. And we've been using red bubbles to describe distractions, things that when our mind wanders away into something that we didn't intend to do, it can stay there, or it can also represent a rabbit hole, something that is a habitual pattern, somewhere we spend a lot of time, we start getting a lot of questions, a lot of thoughts, but no answers, just come out with dissatisfaction, right? So let's start with how we are doing the practice. Right? We are sitting with our object of meditation. So assume the gray bubble represents the object of meditation. And in some time, you have a distraction come up, your mind gets engaged with that. Like we discussed, craving is a mechanism. We don't use the word craving in terms of only high level description of something that you want to do. I have a craving for eating Chinese food, for instance, right? So that is also a craving, but craving is working at a very, very, very basic mental mechanism level. Everything that your attention gets engaged to, anything that you start having a personal interest in, that getting this is good for me, not getting this is bad for me. So that is craving, that mechanism which has a correlate in the tension and tightness that we feel in our body. So distraction comes up, our attention gets engaged with it, and over a period of time, we completely forget about the object. Suddenly, our mindfulness kicks in, says that, hey, we were sitting with our object of meditation, and now we're thinking about something totally random. We use the harmonious practice. We recognize that our attention is with a distraction. We let that distraction be, don't follow it, don't fight with it, don't complain about it. Understand it is just a state of mind for it to arise. And then we relax the tension and tightness in our mind. We are diffusing the craving that is underlying that distraction. Smile and return our mind to the object of meditation. So we are back with our object. In a little while, we have another distraction pop up. So this is a process that will keep happening, right? And every time mindfulness kicks in, we use the 6 hours. After a while, you'll find. So I've been talking to all of you. Almost all of you have been finding that there are stretches where your mind starts to stabilize with the object of meditation. So for a while, you'll start to have no distractions come up, right? And your mind will stay with the object of meditation. You're staying with sending metta to yourself or to your friend. And then we get a new color of bhava. So what is this? Now what's happening is your mind has been learning from what you're doing. So your mind continues to learn. So the mind is basically like a extremely good scientist, right? So back in school, if you do a science experiment, you put out a hypothesis, you perform a procedure, and you come to conclusions and you learn from it. It may be the wrong action, wrong hypothesis, or the wrong method, and you revise. You either succeed in your experiment, you learn something that you were out to learn, or you realize it's a failure and you modify either your hypothesis or your approach, right? So the mind does the same thing. It keeps trying this out and it keeps learning from the feedback that we give it, right? So every time the mind starts to learn that every time I'm chasing after a distraction, I'm getting the instruction to use the 6 hours and come back to the object. So after a while, distractions do happen. They keep coming into our consciousness. Different thoughts keep popping up in our awareness, but our mind stops chasing after them. And this is where we come to a state which is known as the jhanas. Okay. So the jhanas are deep collected states. So you can call them altered states of consciousness. You can call them the collected states. The Buddha has described 8 different jhanas. Okay. And today I'll briefly talk about the jhanas. And they will come in your experience as well. Your mind will start getting extremely stable. There will be an effortless ease of staying with the object. This will not be exclusive of other things that are happening in the background. You will still, if there is a sound, you will still hear it, but your mind will not be tempted to chase after it. If you have some kind of an itch, some kind of a body ache, you'll still register it, but your mind will not necessarily chase after it. Right. So these are deep collected states, and I want to kind of discuss a little bit about this. Now we are developing the third skill, which is collectedness, right? Collectedness or samadhi. Samadhi. The quickly I'll cover the Pali or Sanskrit terms also. So mindfulness in Pali is known as sati. Okay, and this is connected to the Sanskrit root word smriti. Smriti, all of us would know is connected with memory or remembering, right? So what are we trying to remember? We are remembering to observe where mind's attention is, how it is moving from one object to another. That is the basis for the word mindfulness. It comes from sati. Harmonious practice has a very straightforward kind of name. It is samma vayamo, and samma is always used as the samma is has a Sanskrit translation of samyak or appropriate, what is suitable at any point of time. So in the Eightfold Path, the Buddha talks about three skills, mental skills: samma sati, appropriate mindfulness, wise mindfulness, samyak smriti. The second one is Samma Vayamu or Samyak Vyayam, appropriate application or harmonious practice that we call. And this is the 6 R's. And the third thing that the third skill the Buddha talks about is collectedness or Samma Samadhi, Samyak Samadhi. Samadhi means a serene, collected, stable, and Sama means stable, collected, even. Okay, and dhi refers to understanding. So it is about a stable, serene, tranquil understanding. So samadhi refers to these collected states. When colloquially we may have heard of samadhi as somewhere where somebody just gives up their entire life, just decides that okay, I'm sitting here and I will not interact with anything again in the world. It's not like that. So samadhi is actually there are 8 different states of samadhi or these jhanas, where your mind goes deeper and deeper, stays collected, and the amount of noise, the amount of things, the activity that's happening in your mind starts slowing down, and you start seeing each individual mental phenomena with a lot more closeness. So in the prep kit, I have given an example of reading a book, right? So if you're reading a book in a extremely turbulent environment, right? I think I gave the example of reading a book in a bus in India, standing in the middle of traffic, maybe at dusk, with fading light. So that's what happens when we normally don't understand mental phenomena. We understand the stories that have emerged from mental phenomena. We don't see what's happening at a very granular level. And the jhanas are essentially the equivalent of a very well lit, comfortable room, comfortable seat, no maybe soundproof, and you have a book with large fonts right in front of you. There is no way that you can miss it. It's by staying in it, as long as you're in that environment, you're going to be absorbing what is there to be absorbed or learned. And I just wanted to use this opportunity to also talk about why this practice works and why it is very important to do the 6 R's very appropriately. So I just want to talk about that a little bit. Right? So what happened in the years since the last couple of centuries, I had mentioned this in the first talk, right? So for a long time, Buddhism became very institutionalized. The community following a set of rules, following the precepts and doing acts of generosity in the form of, donations or helping each other out. So there was a lot of community aspect that continued. There was a lot of scholarly work that was being done. There was a lot of memorizing of different things that was being done. And interestingly, we have one of the Dhammapad verses that we read in the morning, where we say that just reading or reciting of scriptures is not enough to actually help you make progress, right? So what happened along with that, around a couple of centuries back, when there was starting to be a revival of the uh, personal practice, right? Meditation, development of the mind. There started to be a division between Samatha and Vipassana. So Vipassana or Vipassana is a word used to explain insight. And Samatha, again, is similar to Samadhi. It refers to a stable state of mind, a tranquil state of mind. Okay. And in fact, that's where the name of this practice comes from, tranquil wisdom, insight, meditation. Right. So, what happened is this got broken down into two different practices based on a lot of commentaries and a lot of variations that had happened in whoever had practiced since the Buddha's time. And on one side, there came the Vipassana movement, which started focusing on dry insight. It started, so the yellow circle that you see here, it is the field of awareness. And again, like absolutely, it's a MVP, right? It's a minimum and slide making that I've done to convey the point. But these dots that are disappearing and coming on, right? So they are different mental processes. They are arising, right? So different thoughts we can see as we sit and we observe our mind. We can see different thoughts arise. Sometimes we do not pay attention to them and they go away. A sensation on the skin arises. After a while, it goes away. Sometimes we get distracted when we use the 6 hours. Maybe it goes away once we use the 6 hours. Some distractions we'll need to use the 6 hours multiple times. They keep coming up. At some point they will go away or they won't go. But these we are able to see, for the first time when we start looking inwards, we instead of just seeing the world as it is in terms of stories that our mind tells us, we are actually seeing the building blocks of mental processes. We see the arising and passing away of different phenomena in our mind. Okay. And the dots are representing that. So what's happening here is because we are not making our mind very settled or collected, right? So we have a lot of information that is coming back, and that reduces the amount of insight that we can get. We understand that things are arising and passing away, and after that, intellectually, we can make a lot of links. But experientially, our ability to understand what exactly happened when one phenomenon arose and went away, that is not very well done, right? So this became one type of practice. The other type of practice became something known as samatha. So these things that were supposed to be, in fact, they are not even practices. Samatha and vipassana are outcomes of doing the right kind of practice. They are things that you'll experience when you do the right kind of practice, but they became separate practices. And one-pointed concentration. And why am I bringing this up? This is not a this retreat is absolutely not focused on history, right? One of the things I had experienced while also talking to a couple of you was there is some, I think, I you want to use this opportunity to also reinforce like why the every step of the 6 hours is extremely important, and why we need to use it in the prescribed way. So what happens in one pointed concentration is every time you take an object of meditation, every time your mind drifts away, you bring it back. On the surface, it may seem like this is identical to what we do, but the difference is the relaxed step. The difference is the 6 hours, right? So what happens is, as we discussed, when our attention drifts away and it gets caught with an object, there is a craving under it. Your mind says, "I want something. I want some result that is conducive to me out of this situation," right? And that is why I'm holding on to this thought. So I want something to change over here. Okay. When you don't use the relaxed step and you bring your mind back, when we don't use all of the 6 hours, when we bring our mind back, what the mind is learning is, I want this, my object of meditation, I want it more than this. Okay. And that wanting is essentially craving. Right? So we start bringing the craving in. So the mind starts to learn because it is learning from everything we do. The mind learns that, okay, I will hold on to this life with dear life. Right. So if, for example, uh, you have a dog chasing you, like very angry dog chasing you in the street. At that time, you're not going to think about anything else. You're just going to think about that. So your mind gets attached to your object of meditation with that kind of rigor. But what happens is, while the mind collects, the mind doesn't. The mind calms down. The amount of activity in your mind calms down, as you can see with the fewer number of thoughts, fewer mental phenomena are coming in the field of awareness. But what happens is, our field of awareness actually becomes very limited. it becomes completely wrapped around the object of meditation, and it doesn't see the other things that are happening. So everything that we're learning is actually happening from this process of different things coming up, seeing how they come up, seeing how attention interacts with that. Instead, what happens when we use the 6 hours, right? So every time we relax, we are teaching our mind not only that we have to stay with the object, we are also teaching our mind not to take things personally. So we are not saying that I want to take this object of meditation more personally than the distraction. We are saying that let's not take anything personally. Let's understand things came up because the conditions were right for them, because the conditions were suitable for them. So something has come up. Now let's relax all tension and tightness, relax the craving, and come back to the object of meditation. So the mind learns that craving is not to be cultivated. The mind learns that we need to stay with the object of meditation. So your mind starts getting collected around the object of meditation, but it is not exclusive. It understands any other phenomena are happening because the conditions are right for them. So they also stay in your field of awareness. And as you enter a jhana, your attention stops wrapping up around the little distraction, little phenomena that are happening. So your mind stops going there. They're still happening, they're still falling on your field of awareness. You still see them. But the interesting thing is now are we are getting more and more magnified. So the number of things that are coming up because your body or and mind is in lesser of a state of agitation, the number of things that are coming up is lesser, and they're still coming in your awareness, right? So you're able to start understanding them better. A lot of you have already come to this stage. You're experiencing, you're going through the jhanas, and for now it may not seem very. It may be seem like some interesting phenomena that is happening, but your mind has already started learning from this. So we'll be over the next few days. We'll be guiding you through your path through the jhana. And again, like I mentioned, the relaxed step is the key. So working with craving directly. So the four noble truths that the Buddha taught. This is something we'll be going back to, and we'll finally be unpacking in detail once we have more ingredients in place. So what did the Buddha say? A lot of people, for interesting suttas, there is Malumkya Putra Sutta. So this gentleman goes to the Buddha and says, okay, is the world infinite? Is the world eternal? So he starts asking metaphysical questions, right? Tell me everything about the universe. And the Buddha says, just stop for a second. Did I tell you I'm going to give you a lesson in quantum physics? I mean, I'm paraphrasing in a very different way. The Buddha says, I didn't ask you to come here because I'm going to give you metaphysical knowledge. He said, I teach one and one thing only, which is the end of suffering. Yes, the dukkha. Yes. And the four noble truths that he presented related to this. The first noble truth is the truth of suffering, the existence of dukkha or suffering. The fact that in life we have dissatisfactory experiences. It can range from anything from a paper cut or from stubbing your toe somewhere, or having a little bit of extra salt or low salt in your food compared to your preference. That is also dissatisfaction. And dissatisfaction can be extremely cruel, like getting paralyzed, losing a loved one. So dissatisfaction is the end of dissatisfaction, the end of suffering, the end of dukkha is what the Buddha taught. It doesn't teach anything else. Second thing that the Buddha says, the second noble truth is the origin of suffering. What is it that suffering is based on? And the Buddha says the second truth, dukkha samudaya, origin of suffering is craving. Craving or tanha or trishna. Trishna in Sanskrit or in Hindi, tanha in Pali. This craving is the foundation on which suffering is. Getting personally attached to a certain outcome in a situation. I want this. If this happens, I'll be happy. If this does not happen, I will not be happy. Or the world is like this. I am not happy with this. I will be happy if the world was different. Not being in friction with reality, right? Because of that personal taking things personally and attaching your happiness to a certain outcome. Then he teaches the third truth is that the cessation of suffering or dukkha nirodha. And he says the cessation of suffering comes from the cessation of craving. So very simple logical thing he says there is suffering. Suffering is based on craving. That is the origin. If we remove craving, suffering will also come to an end. Okay. So he says the third noble truth is dukkha nirodha or the cessation of suffering through the cessation of craving. And the fourth step he says, and okay, this is great conceptually, but what I will do is I will teach you a path that leads to the end of suffering. And this is the Noble Eightfold Path. And we'll go through this Noble Eightfold Path. We'll see how the Four Noble Truths again and again. Every time we learn new information, when we go to our practice, we see phenomena, and we come back to that information with something additional, we learn something more. So this is this is not a linear learning. So everything starts forming that fabric that I talked about, like sutras. So we are starting to develop that fabric. And craving is directly evidenced by us as the tension attack. And you'll see the time, if you remember a time that you were absolutely happy with life, right? So a lot of us are using those memories, but sometimes, for example, suppose I'll give an example because I live in Goa. I'll give an example of a beach, right? You're sitting on a beach with your friends and family or whoever your favorite people are in the world, and there's a nice breeze, okay, and absolutely great temperature. Maybe you're also sitting in the shade because it can get very sunny. And at that time, you're not complaining that I wish there were two more clouds, two round clouds on the right top corner of my view is really going to make it. But right now, I'm not happy. At that time, you're at peace, right? There is no friction with reality. The friction comes when you say, okay, I need to change something, I need a certain outcome, and only dependent on that outcome will I be happy. This mechanism, this is a very fundamental mechanism, very evolutionarily important mechanism. We'll unpack this in more detail, but this craving is what is leading to suffering, because that craving will never be satisfied. We'll move on to the next craving, or what we want in that craving, the outcome we'll not reach. Or if we reach that outcome, we will not be able to freeze the world in that state. Okay, I got that outcome. Now I want the world to be exactly like this, not change from there. Right? So the relaxed step where we are reducing craving, while we are teaching our mind that we want to come back to the object. Why do we use the anchor? We use the anchor so that our mind starts getting stable. It is not going after one thing after the other, because then it will continue to be see a lot of mental phenomena. When it keeps coming back to one object, the mind says, okay, we are really serious about staying with the object. Let's stay here and let's not go running after other things. So your mind gets collected, but at the same time, you start seeing other phenomena. You start zooming into them. So the relaxed step, every time we use it, we are diffusing the craving in our mind, and we are also teaching our mind that apart from being collected with one object, we don't want to be cultivating craving. So this is happening during the practice. This is taking you into the jhanas, and this is also teaching you lessons for your daily life, right? So understanding craving, being able to diffuse craving. Okay, so now let's come to the third thing that I said I will touch upon. Okay, so a lot of us across the world, I think the common perception is that meditation means focusing on your breath. Right? So if we kind of look at the things that we've been discussing, right, about what the practice is, what these skills are. So the object of meditation is just one anchor. We are using an anchor to train our mental skills. So it is a prop in our action of mental skills. So it is the barbell in your gym, right? So it's not the muscle you're exercising. You could be using a barbell, you could be using a pair of dumbbells, you could be using your dog to build up your, lift up your dog to build up your muscle, right? So the muscles are more important, the skills are more important, right? Why are we using the Brahmaviharas? What are the Brahmaviharas and how do they help? Okay. So we started with the first object, which is sending a feeling of goodwill, bring up a happy memory, sending that goodwill to ourselves, then sending that same goodwill to our friend. Okay. This is the feeling of metta. Metta is a Pali word. The Sanskrit equivalent is maitri. Maitri, a lot of you might recognize, is friendliness, right? It's translated as loving kindness because that is the kind of, so friendship has a lot of aspect. Loving kindness, the feeling of goodwill, right? The feeling of not wanting, not being transactional, right? Wanting something good for the other person because you care about them, not just because it is transactionally beneficial for you. So Maitri is that feeling. We start with that. Okay. So I just want to start. Why do I have these seeds and these plants? Right. I want to explain that. So the reason that craving comes in, right? The reason that craving drives what's happening is, like I mentioned, it's our evolutionary baggage. So we are trained to seek information all the time. So we grew up. I mean, we started our journey as humans in extremely hostile circumstances, exposed to the environment, living in forests, living in deserts, etc. Right? And at that time, as humans, we have three, as any biological organism that is alive today, that has gone through the test of evolution, right? So there are three fundamental driving forces, right? So if you have made it so far past evolution, then one, you know how to avoid harm, right? So you need to, especially fundamentally, you need to reproduce before you die, right? So an organism, those organisms that are around are those that manage to pass on their genes before they perish, right? That is how any species is alive today, right? And this means three things essentially. So one is there is a drive for reproduction. Secondly, there is a drive for energy consumption. So the amount of energy that we spend should not be more than the energy that we consume. So if you eat less food than the energy you expend every day, at some point you're going to starve, right? So if you don't eat anything, you're going to starve. That is very obvious. And if there is a deficiency in that budget, at some point you're going to come to an end before you're able to propagate your genes, right? And the third thing is harm avoidance. So harm avoidance can either mean like immediate termination, immediate death, or it can also mean that, for example, if you were to get crippled, if you get hurt, it will affect your ability to conserve your energy. It will your ability to protect yourself from others, right? So as a result of this, we are always on the lookout for threats, right? So because of the strong urge for harm avoidance. So broadly, our mind is always looking for threats and opportunities. So opportunities to eat, opportunities to mate. Okay. So those are opportunities to survive and to propagate our genes, and threats to survival, threats to energy conservation. So these are the things that the mind biologically, right? This is hardwired into us. We are always looking at threats and opportunities. Out of that, we tend to always focus on the threats. Threats are more dangerous because if there is harm, it's going to affect everything. It's going to affect our ability to save ourselves from future harm. It's going to affect our ability to maybe gather food or hunt for food, or and affect our ability to propagate it. So our body is always scanning the environment for threats and opportunities. It's always in a state of agitation, right? So this kind of this thing. So craving is a representation of that, right? So it represents that desperation for wanting some outcomes, right? So outcomes that take us towards opportunities, outcomes that take us away from threats. So I like it, I don't like it is a way of talking about that internal. And this always keeps our body in on edge, right? So in fact, there is a very interesting thing that we talk about. So the body has two modes in which it operates. There is a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system is always looking at threats and opportunities. So at that time, it doesn't think about nourishing the body or healing the body or keeping it well. It is always thinking about making sure your muscles are full of blood, and your heart rate goes up, so you have more oxygen flowing through your body. You're ready for action. You have adrenaline, so you can have that burst of action if required. So we are uh, geared to be in that mode. And luckily for us, there is a converse, which is the parasympathetic system, which essentially looks at healing. It says, okay, there is no action, there is no imminent threat, there is no opportunity. Let us heal, right? Let us take care of our mind and body. Let us, do some TLC for ourselves, right? So that's the other system. And what happens is this is so whenever we are in a state of craving, we are always activating the sympathetic nervous system, and when we are out of that state of craving, we are activating the parasympathetic nervous system. And these feelings, so along with that survival instinct, right? That always I need to survive, I need to take advantage of every opportunity, I need to stay away from every threat. Along with that, we have a complementary set of things. So because we evolved as social animals, right? So we need to cooperate with people. Uh, Human baby needs to be taken care of for multiple years before it becomes viable, before it can survive in the wild, right? So we also have internally these altruistic uh, states, right? So if you look at these Maitri or loving kindness, Karuna or compassion, Mudita, which is appreciative joy, right? You have happiness at the success or uh, happiness of others, and you have equanimity. So these are the counterbalance to this desperate survival instinct, right? These also develop, like I said, because we are social animals. Cooperation is a very important part of us being able to survive and to actually dominate all species in the world today. So what we are turning to is the Brahmaviharas, and I have mentioned this in some of the interviews. I've also mentioned it in the talk. Now, the Brahmaviharas are in direct contrast to this continuous information seeking and agitated and desperation and anxious behavior, which is driven by craving, right? So that is the kind of warrior mode. This is the healer mode, right? It is in direct contrast. So when we use metta as an object of meditation, as opposed to breath or something else, there are multiple things you can use as an object of meditation. You develop a large contrast between the mind going into that anxious craving mode and the mind being in metta. So this helps in developing your mindfulness very uh, nicely. This also helps in reducing the amount of craving that you have, right? So naturally, when your mind is directed towards the benefit of another person, right? Starting with your friend, some of you are also now sharing it with other people. So when your mind is directed towards that, the tendency to get caught up in thoughts of, okay, what do I get out of this? What am I afraid of here? What do I want? So that becomes this kind of takes us towards that area, and at the same time, it also kickstarts our parasympathetic nervous system. So you know for sure that you are in a safe space, right? If you're able to sit and send a wish of goodwill to other people, your mind understands it's in a safe place. So it starts going into that healing mode for itself. So we have the seed within us, right? All of us have this seed because of the fact that apart from being survivors in the evolutionary race, we are also our survival has heavily relied on cooperation and kindness to each other. So we have the seed, and by starting with the practice, we start developing first Maitri. So we have all felt these different emotions. We have felt compassion, we have felt equanimity in different situations, but we don't have mastery of it. So now with this practice, we will start identifying it very clearly what it is. We will be starting to train ourselves to be able to generate it. I know what compassion is, how can I generate it, and how can I share it without continuously doing the calculus of how it will be beneficial for me. Okay, so we start with Maitri, and this will now connect with the jhanas. Okay, so like I said, there are 8 different jhanas. Uh, in the first 4 jhanas, Maitri takes us to that. The object of meditation, Metta, will take us to the first four jhanas. These are different states, but in your experience, they might all come jumbled together right now. With more practice, you can start to differentiate between these states. Okay. So metta takes us through these four. As we develop metta, right? So we are having a wish of goodwill for the other person, and along at the same time, we are also getting insights as our mind gets deeper. We are starting to get insights that hey, my chasing after random thoughts that come up in my mind, and then taking it personally, and then going down that rabbit hole, spending a lot of time, is creating a lot of dissatisfaction for me, right? My ability not to act on that impulse, right? So if somebody says something, immediately there is a craving. You want to respond to them. You want to say something, right? If by not acting on that impulse, understanding, identifying that as a craving based distraction, if I'm able to use the 6 hours, I'm able to actually get a much better outcome for myself as well as for another person. So your mind starts seeing this, starts putting two and two together. And with that, you start getting insight into your own suffering, how craving leads to your suffering, right? You start understanding the noble truths for yourself. As you spend time with this, you also start to realize that everyone else, we are all in this together. Everyone else is going through the same process. They are creating suffering for themselves. Actions that you feel are directed towards yourself, violent towards yourself, for instance, they are performing those actions out of ignorance. They are performing those actions based on compulsive tendencies, based on craving. And they are creating suffering not only for you, but for themselves as well. As you see this, you start to develop compassion. As you start understanding your own suffering, so karuna is the evolution. As you feed the initial seed of, you know, cooperation, kindness, altruism towards others, you start first by developing metta. And as you feed metta, you start getting insights into your own suffering, and you start getting compassion. You start having compassion for the suffering of others. In terms of the jhanas, what happens is after the fourth jhana, I have started changing practice for some of you. You start moving into the first four jhanas are known as the Rupa jhanas. Okay, so Rupa jhanas means you still are feeling a lot more embodied. Okay, as we go to the Arupa jhanas, what happens is your mind starts paying lesser and lesser attention to your body. It understands we are sitting in a safe space. We are not crossing traffic or running through a jungle or whatever. So we don't need to pay too much attention to the body. So you may start to feel the metta go up to your head because you're essentially losing your level of engagement with your body. And you start moving towards the Arupa jhana. You feel formless, you feel more disembodied over there. The experience is that your mind is not paying attention to your body. A lot of us feel disembodied even when we are in our phone, right? We don't care about the real world. We can walk through traffic while going through phone, or at least we have seen something. But that disembodied is very different. There is no awareness of what's happening. That is more like one pointed concentration. You're completely involved in that thing, you're disembodied, but you don't really understand what else is happening in your mind. So with Karuna, we go to the fifth jhana. That becomes the object of meditation automatically changes from metta to Karuna. This is the base of infinite space. Again, I will discuss more details on those with people as you start reaching those states. Okay. The Arupa jhanas come in. So let's just talk about the Brahmaviharas right now, Karuna. Okay. As we start cultivating this further, we nurture this seed that we have inside us. We go to something that is actually much more challenging than we would like to think. We would like to think that we are easily able to access altruistic joy. When we see somebody else, we have a natural happiness towards that. But what happens is, again, because of the evolutionary baggage that we have, every time we hear of somebody else doing well, the first question internally that gets triggered is, are we now lower in the value hierarchy? Are we like less of a person because somebody else got something, right? So that is a very natural impulse that gets triggered. Mudita now is an evolution from Karuna because you understand the suffering of another person. And if there is an opportunity for their suffering to become less, you find joy in that as well. So I'll just repeat this because it's so we start with metta, goodwill for others. As we do this, we start understanding how suffering in our own mind gets developed, how we go from away from metta to states of craving. As we understand our own suffering, we start to see it in other people. This leads to compassion or karuna. As we understand the suffering of other beings, we start rejoicing any opportunity that they have for happiness. Mudita becomes the object of meditation. Now, what you're radiating automatically changes into mudita as you go into the base of infinite consciousness. This is the next jhana, the sixth jhana. As we start doing this, as we start cultivating this, finally we come to equanimity. We start understanding that things are not good or bad by themselves. The meaning that we ascribe to them. Attachment with craving is what is making it seem good or seem bad for us. So we start developing that insight. This is the hardest, to be able to see everything the same way, to be able to see the worst thing that you can imagine and the best thing you can imagine, and be able to have an equanimous state of mind. Understand that these are things that have come about because the conditions are right for them, whether it is in our mind, whether it is in the world. The conditions were right, things happened. Your wanting or not wanting has nothing to do with it. But it can definitely, your wanting and not wanting, you're taking things personally, can definitely create suffering for you. That it can do. So equanimity develops as it's the last to develop, and this accompanies the seventh jhana, which is the base of nothingness. Okay? And I will drop a note tomorrow about the different jhanas, but for now, in your practice, the jhanas will not be very clear. The question that I asked me in the interview will help me understand whether you're experiencing a jhana, what you need to go towards a jhana, or how you can proceed with the jhana. So I'll start getting a sense of that. And for you, the practice will remain the same. Stay with the object, even if the texture changes. And every time your mind gets distracted, bring it back with the 6 hours. So these are the Brahmaviharas or the divine abodes, abode fit for the god. So whenever there is a conversation of buying property in Goa, because a lot of people talk to me about it, I normally tell them I have four extremely great houses in Goa, and I don't tell them that they're Metta, Karuna, Mudita, and Upekha. Those are the states where your mind, if your mind is, you will not want for anything in life. If your mind is in Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upekha, it is the ultimate prosperity. And you will have to experience it. Don't trust me. Please experience it. Please stick to the instruction. Use the 6 hours carefully. Take out the time to do this practice. Use this week to go deeper so that you can guide yourself going forward, right? So use that opportunity and you will know what it is to be in a Brahmavihara. Great. So I've been talking for a long time. I have quickly just recap what we covered today. The jhanas, as they will, are a result of collectedness that develops in our mind. As we keep using our mindfulness and 6 hours to bring our mind back gently to the object of meditation, our mind says, let's go deep, let's get settled, let's stay with the object of meditation, and let's get rid of craving. As this happens, you start experiencing the jhanas. In fact, again, like I said, the popular perception is that breath is the magic, right? And there is a lot of mythology around breath also, what breath means and how it is. But the Buddha, at least, in the third of the suttas, in the middle length discourses, he says jhanas are the path to awakening. He tells people to do the jhanas. In fact, in terms of practice, this is what he tells most of the time. So what also happens in the jhanas is it's very easy for us to see thoughts because your mind doesn't chase after thoughts that are arising. So when those habitual patterns arise, you also start learning that it is not necessary to start chasing and falling into the same habitual pattern every time, right? So it starts also changing your compulsiveness, your tendency to jump into habitual pattern. The next thing that we discussed briefly, these are deeply restorative states. They take a break from the fight, flight, freeze mode, right? So, if an animal senses danger, it will either fight or it will run away or it will just freeze if it is completely scared. And we are in that mode most of the day, especially now. We don't even need to be in those situations. Our mind is so complex, it can generate those situations for us, right? It can generate situations of extreme danger, extreme fear, extreme sorrow, extreme frustration for us, and put us in this mode. The jhanas take us into it's almost like being in a child baby in the womb, right, or a baby in a mother's embrace. So extremely deeply restorative state for your mind as well as body. And finally, in this state, all your skills are getting exercised very strongly. You start understanding what these skills are, exactly why we are using them. Start understanding the anatomy. There are more things about the jhanas that we learn. I don't want to cram any more things. I've introduced a lot of concepts, but as we start going further, right, start breaking down into the process of going into a distraction, process of our mind creating the universe in our for ourselves to see, right? If we go into that, we'll start understanding other things that happen with the jhanas. I'll take a pause here and take a sip of water. Happy to hear any thoughts, any questions that you'd like to share.
So, if I understand correctly, when one is in a jhana, the frequency of applying 6 hours would kind of reduce because you don't need to like relax and all. You're just like observing everything.
Yes, your mind basically, like I said, you have a wide field of awareness, but your awareness is centered around your object. So other
Hmm.
things are coming, but your mind attention is not centering around that and closing in on that. That happens when there is craving. So it will latch onto something. So craving and clinging means it will latch onto something. Here it's coming, but your mind doesn't say, it's like, okay, something came up. I didn't ask for it to come up. I don't need to chase something. Right? That's what happens.
And the second thing I wanted to ask is what is the difference between compassion and loving kindness?
So compassion has a greater degree of understanding suffering. So loving kindness, you can share with somebody who's suffering, who's not suffering, whatever. It's just generally outwardly directed.
Hmm.
Compassion brings in a greater degree of as you understand your suffering, you understand, you know, when we look at people, right, we don't understand that they may be experiencing what you experience on the worst day of your life, right? So compassion helps you see that this is a being that is capable of suffering. It will strengthen your
Can
motivation to be kind and loving and supportive to them.
So, Rajiv, I have a very operational sort of a question,
Yeah.
and this is more around the practice itself, right? So, what I've seen over the last couple of days in my practice is that things keep going steadily, and I'm in that entire circle of focusing on my object of meditation. If there's a distraction, there are times when I'm able to view it. There are times when I do get distracted, do a 6 hour, come back, and then focus again, right? And then there's almost like a threshold that gets hit, after which it's almost as if the mind gets tired, or or you're like, okay, this is enough. Like
Yes.
I've 6 hour enough for this sitting, and I need to get out of it. So how does one kind of like a I mean the obvious question is, why does this happen? To which I kind of know the answer, kind of linked to craving. But how does one kind of push through this threshold that you hit, and then it becomes difficult to go beyond that?
Yeah, so I'll give you one magic word to remember every time, right? So it is allow. Okay, allow things to happen. Allow your loving kindness to flow, right? So you're doing the directions practice right now. So what's happening is there are restlessness comes in because when we put so when you think about the words you're using, because that reflects how your mind is looking at the entire. So when you say push through, right? So you're putting in an effort, but that is why there is fatigue, right? So you can put in use willpower to a certain extent to push through, right? At some point there will be fatigue, right? So just remember that word allow, and it happens because what happens is metta can be a very lovely feeling, and you want to just drown the world with it, like flood the world with. But what happens is there you may bring in craving, right? So also very important is when we do this practice, right? Whether we are sending it to the direction, whether we are sending it to ourselves or to our friend, right? We don't have to do it. We have to allow it to happen, right? So we have to allow that feeling to go. We have to just activate that feeling. We use the memory initially. Later on, just a smile is enough. Later on, just the intention to send that feeling will become enough. Okay. So you have to just activate that feeling and then direct it. Okay. So it is, think of it like a river that is flowing and you just have to direct it. First, you directed it towards yourselves, then you direct it towards your friend, and now you're directing it towards all being, right? So think of it that way. Then it will not feel exhausting or stressful. When you're 6 hour, when you smile, especially, see the fun in it, right? See the fact that you got your mind. I mean, you should feel happy about it. It's not an effort, it's a victory, right? Your mindfulness sharpened. You managed to reduce craving that was there in your mind. So it is a victory in every way, right? And it is just something that you need to do, right? So it's not something a 6 hour or a distraction. Like again, I think this is something we talked about yesterday. Distractions are our friends. It's great. Let it come, right? It is teaching me where my deepest attachments are. It is teaching me what are the things I take personally. It is teaching me how often it is possible for my mindfulness to slip. It is teaching me how craving is an ever-present phenomenon, and it is giving me an opportunity to practice harmonious practice also, right? The right kind of effort. So that is fantastic. Let it come, right? So an example that I use sometimes is like, so if a distraction comes, right? So assume you're having a get together at your home, and there is somebody very important in your life that you really want to spend time with. Okay, and you have maybe an uninvited person comes in. Okay, you don't need to get disturbed. You greet them, smile at them, you let them go get their beverage of choice, right? And you move back to your uh, main, person of interest. So you're not fighting with them. You may initially get a little agitated, like why has this person come? You're relaxing that. You want to come back to your, main person with a nice, open, expansive, happy mind, right? So you relax that tension. You let them be. You let them do what they want. You don't have the attention to provide them, and you smile and you come back to your object of meditation. So that's all you're doing. So even if there are many uninvited guests, that's great. Each one of them is coming with a lesson for you. So don't get agitated, right? So that makes the 6 hours less cumbersome, less tiring, less repetitive. Every time you're doing it is great. You put in another rep, right? You like working out, so I think you should think about it. I managed to, I mean, use the idea of it being a rep to your like to use your natural,
Yeah.
mental wiring to help you. And the other thing is, yes, so you don't have to flood the world with your love. I mean, you can allow it to, but you don't have to make it happen. You don't have to do it, right? So it's doing versus being kind of a difference. if that
A
helps.
follow, it really does. And a follow-up is on, so of all the types of distractions or rabbit holes, right? Um, I find the most difficult to come out of sloth/torpor, because often what that is linked to for me is maybe, inadequate sleep or inadequate rest, right? So how, and you had yesterday in your talk, you'd mentioned something about it, um,
Yeah.
about how to kind of tackle that, but would be good if you can maybe expand on that specific topic a little bit more.
Great. And that's a great question, right? So a lot of us face that challenge. And what is important to remember here is sloth is the counterpart of restlessness. Okay. So it's a cycle of overstimulation, stimulation seeking and overstimulation. Right? So overstimulation makes you dull once you've had overstimulation. So in this case, what the sloth is likely coming from the extra energy and restlessness that is driving the first challenge that you got. And at some point that dries out, and then you go into sloth. And that is why also if you look at the thing, so joy is one of the great antidotes to sloth, right? So see the humor in catching your mind getting distracted every time, right?